In this video, we're going to be covering the current settings for toolpathing inside of BobCAD-CAM. Now, if we go up to the CAM tab at the top of the screen here, at the top we'll see current settings. Now, you really want to do this before you ever even add toolpath to your part, before you start your first job, because this is going to allow you to set up your default machine and post-processor and really all the settings that go along with it. So if we click on current settings, it'll bring up the current settings tab. Now right here we have the make of the machine. So there's a bunch of built-in machines already in here. We can see there's a Haas 3-axis mill, and a lot of these actually come with different post-processors to them. So you can first off see if your machine is in here. If it's not, we can actually create a new machine by saying add. If we add a new machine, we have to define everything about that machine, the length of X, Y, Z, all that information. If you need a hand on that, call tech support. They will help you out with it for sure. Now down here we have our maximum number of tools for that machine. We have our rapid feed rate. Now the rapid feed rate is not really used inside of BobCAD for anything other than us calculating a cycle time. We know how much distance is spent rapiding. So if we have something like 1,800 inches of rapiding happening in our program, then that adds 1 minute of time onto our feature, onto our job, because our rapid feed rate is 1,800 inches per minute. And then next to that, we have our maximum spindle speed. Now this is where we enter in the maximum that the spindle can run. Now if you have a router that can go up to 24,000 or 18,000 RPM, you're going to want to make sure to change this. Otherwise, if you ever put in a spindle RPM that is higher than the maximum spindle speed that's set here, it will automatically default it down to the maximum. So if you put 18,000 in, it would output in the code as 10,000. So you want to make sure to change this one. And same thing goes for the cutting feed rate, the maximum cutting feed rate. This is the fastest we can output a feed rate for your machine. So if your machine's maximum is 250, you're going to change that to 250 so that anything that might potentially be over 250 gets dropped down to 250. I'm going to leave mine at 500 here. And then right down here we have some coolant options which allow you to use customized coolant depending on what your post has in it. It might need an update as it lists right here. So right here you could say that on certain blocks it calls out a different type of misting. So if you enable this throughout the post, you can call up different coolant settings based on just a quick option click. Now, right down here, we then have our machine definition. Now, the machine definition is where we go to build the machine essentially. This is a virtual copy of a 3-axis machine. What we can do, really important here, is really just the size of the machine. If we look at my Y, it says I have a Y that goes from -12 to 12. So I have a 24-inch Y. So I could set that to my actual X, Y, and Z distances. Now the thing with this is when you're setting up your minimum and maximum, it's based on the center of the table. So from the center of the table, you can go -12 backwards and +12 forwards. If we look at our X, we can say go -28 to the left and 28 to the right. So our total working envelope for X, 56 inches. And then for Z, the minimum would be 0. If the face of the spindle without a tool in it can touch the table, that's going to be 0. And then it's the maximum height from there. So if your machine can't touch the face of the spindle to the table, then you might have a minimum that is 1 or 2 inches. And then it's from there to the maximum value. Under the posting tab, we then have settings for our post processor. So first thing is picking a post processor. If we hit select, and then we go over to our C drive, into the BobCAD-CAM data folder, and down to the version 34, then into the posts folder, and then into the mill folder, we'll be able to see all the post processors that we can choose from. So we'd be able to pick the one that works for this machine. And when we say open, what this does is anytime we pick this specific machine, it's going to open up with this specific post processor. Right below that, we have our NC file path, and that's just a location where we save a copy of your NC code. So when you post your code, we'll save a copy in there. and you'll have a copy inside of wherever you decide to save it as well. Right here's our file extension for our posted code. So by default, it's a .nc. You might use a .txt or a .tap. All you have to do is type that in right here. You're just going to say .txt, and now I would have a text file for my code. I'm going to go back to NC. Right here's our program number. So as we create jobs, we need to have a program number in there. By default, we're just going to put a 100 into every program. So every program is going to be labeled as program number 100. If your machine needs 4 digits for the program number, go ahead and just change that to 1,000. And then you could change the actual program number when you post the code. You can go ahead and modify it. Right here we have our posting, whether we're doing absolute or incremental code. Nowadays, most of the post processors work off this post setting option, meaning the post processor itself is either absolute or incremental. You're not really going to use these buttons to switch that. So you're going to be based on the post. If you need an absolute post, contact the posting department. If you need an incremental post, you can contact them as well, and they'll be able to set one up for you. Now for line numbering, your end numbers at the beginning of each line, you could tell it what to start on and then what to increment by. So we could say start at number 1 and increment by 1. So it'd be an N1, N2, N3, and N4 all the way down. I could also say start at 10 and increment by 10. And that's going to be N10, N20, N30, N40, and so on. If we don't want sequence numbers, you can set both of these to 0, and they will output no line numbers. Now just remember, if you move from one system to another, this will be a setting you have to change on every computer. If you never want line numbers, contact tech support and they will actually turn off the line numbers in the post processor so you never have to think about it again. Right down here we have our subprograms and whether or not we output subprograms, which all depending on your post, you have to make sure everything's set up for your subprograms. If you're using a multi-axis machine, you could use transform planes and index system origins. Right here is an option specifically for dogleg rapiding. Now a dogleg rapid is where all axis moves involved are moving at the maximum speed during rapid moves. So the intermediate positions between the start and the finish are not controlled. In the case of a 2-axis rapid move, the result is that one axis usually gets to its final position before the other. If you ever notice that happening on your machine, you can come in here and just check that button and we will try and fix that. Right down here we have output arcs in a 4-axis NC program. This is just whether or not we can output the arcs in the program if your machine will accept it. And then down here we have output automatic comments. Now all throughout the post, we will have comments kind of built in. So if a tool change is happening, it'll say next cut, next tool. If it's a null tool change or no tool change is happening, we're going to keep the same tool, then you will see null tool change or next cut, same tool, just so it knows not to put a tool change into that. So this is whether or not you want those comments to output. And then finally we get to multi-axis posting. We're not going to spend too much time on this. This is usually going to be set up by the posting department when they build the machine. And so it's going to allow you to change the limits on the machine, the pole handling, any repositioning, as well as really the move list coordinates. And the big thing we want to look at here for 3-axis is we want to make sure that under standard here it says machine compensation in Z only. If we have that setting, we're pretty good to go. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And that concludes the video on the CAM current settings from inside of BobCAD-CAM.